The metaphysical poets were a loose group of British poets in the 17th century whose poems reflected speculation of love and religion. These poets were not strongly affiliated and many of them didn't know each other. One of the major influences to the analytical style of metaphysical poems was the prominence of the terrible state of European health. Donne used the prevalent images of the deceased and the sickly to satirically portray all of the fools and knaves in England. The prevalence of death and hardship also had a large impact in Donne's later work, prompting gloomier and more somber poetry. Religion was another big focus in metaphysical poetry as it dictated the social norms of almost all of those living in England at the time. Donne and other poets criticized the way in which society followed blindly and didn't criticize any traditions which seemed strange or illogical. During the time of the metaphysical poets, new advances in technology and science were beginning to upset long-held beliefs about the world and God's role in its workings. This made it harder for existing poets to create metaphors around our world and the divine. This was the main factor for the creation of metaphysical conceits. The metaphysical era of poetry was characterized by unusual metaphors, wit, and similes. The lyrical poems frequently used paradox, juxtaposition, irony, allusion, and conceit to conceptually compare two things. These poems rose as a reaction to the extremes of patriarchism and confronted the complications of experience. Rhythms of the metaphysical poems reflect irregular and unpredictable movements of the active mind. Written in unequal and varying lengths, the poems display speculation about topics like religion, love, death, and worship. The dramatic poems also displayed the application of religious images and ideas to human love. Most of these poems reflected on everyday situations and employed the two big questions at the heart of metaphysical thought: what is there and what is it like? The conceit is the major feature of metaphysical poetry. It can be described as a witty comparison which is more conceptual than literal and often drew attention to the two objects' differences. In the poem Praise, George Herbert compares the generosity of God to a bottomless bottle to take in the speaker's tears. The major figures of the time: Samuel Johnson and John Donne were the major figures of the era, Johnson being the one who deemed the poets the metaphysical poets and Donne being the most prominent poet of the time. John Donne, 1571 to 1631. He was born into a wealthy Roman Catholic family. He was brilliant and well educated. His life had two phases. In phase 1, he wrote witty, rankish, intellectually flashy love poems. His early love lyrics and satires revolved around his fellow students when he studied law. Soldier and adventurer in expeditions with Sir Walter Raleigh. In 1598, he was appointed to private secretary of Sir Thomas Egerton, one of the highest officials in Elizabeth's government. Phase 2, he became a famous, eloquent preacher. In 1601, he secretly married a 16-year-old Anne More, Lady Egerton's niece. Marriage was discovered by Anne's father, so Donne was imprisoned and dismissed from office. This initiated the second half of his career. He didn't join Anglican Church even when he left Roman Catholic. King James first recognized his potential as a religious thinker, and in 1607 he said that if Donne wanted any employment from it would be in the church. Donne decided to enter ministry in 1615. The death of Donne. From 1621 death, he was Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, London Centre of Church of England. Just weeks before his death, he delivered his own funeral sermon. He was the most theatrical and spell-binding preacher of the age. Success was immediate and lasted until his death. Samuel Johnson, 1709 to 1784. He was born in Lichfield, England, September 18, 1709. When he was 8, he stopped going to the church and abandoned his religion. He went to Oxford. He is one of the most quoted of English writers. Later part of 18th century was often called the Age of Johnson. Other poets include George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, Abraham Cowley, St. Robert Southwell, Richard Crashaw, Thomas Traherne, and Henry Vaughan. And we'll be discussing all those metaphysical poets in detail in our next video. So please subscribe to our channel. Thank you.